Greetings, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Safest Family on the Block, where knowledge is power. I'm your host, Jason, and joining me today is the legendary Brodeur. Hello, Mike. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing very, very well. Legendary, I don't know. I don't know at this point. Do I give my bona fides, or do I ask you very bluntly, as a person who doesn't have children, who knows very little about his own personal safety, what am I doing here?
Well, I'm really glad you asked. Now, folks, Brodeur's been in the gaming industry for pretty much your entire adult life, yeah?
Yeah, I have been a hobbyist, a gamer since I was in the single digits, and I have a little over 15 years of hobby retail experience. We can get more into that. I've been a gaming podcaster for about 9 years. I've done tons of conventions. I've run tons of games. I was a professional game master for a while. I am a one-time published author and a one-time published game writer as well. My game is about to hit streets. I'm super excited.
And so, Mike,
is that what you were trying to provoke for me?
Exactly. So yeah, Mike's been involved in the gaming industry for a very long time. He doesn't have kids himself, but he's a man with a lot of very good friends and has loved a lot of kids, not that way, but in the appropriate way. And he has some personal experiences with overcoming childhood trauma through gaming. And one of the things that I've noticed as a parent, that I've heard again and again and again from experts ranging from bodyguards to suicide counselors to communication specialists to police, is talking to our kids, creating warm relationships with our kids, modeling and teaching how to be a resilient human being are the ways that you keep your kids out of the nasty. The ways that your kids don't end up being a attractive target for a child trafficker or an abuser. The ways that you raise your kids to come to you with their problems instead of asking the internet for advice. And in my experience, and Mike and I have very different childhoods, and I think we'll talk about some of that over the time, but in my experience, a lot of that for me came at the gaming table, look, on the other side of a chessboard or a risk board from my dad, or in a tabletop role-playing game session with my uncle and my cousins. And as a gaming expert, I thought we'd talk a bit about that, about games and how they can be used to make our kids' lives more fun and also make our kids safer.
I think that's an excellent topic. And I guess I do have some semblance of qualification then. I have gamed with many kids. I have 3 nephews of my own that I absolutely adore, who my brother is raising properly into gamers. So yeah, I have to tell you that for me, and when you asked me to be on the show, just setting all joking aside about about not understanding why I was going to be a guest, but I really did think about it quite a bit, because I told you, and not with any hyperbole, that as a kid, gaming was really the thing that saved me. I mean, my childhood was, and I don't want to sound hyperbolic here, but my childhood was ugly, and I know that other people certainly had it worse than I do. And nobody ever put a finger in my loophole, and none of the violence ever visited upon me was sexual. It was all physical, psychological, and verbal. So I'm counting my blessings. I really, really am. But gaming was the thing that provided me the opportunity to exercise my imagination and not be me. But it also provided a structure that lended itself to longevity. And I know that sounds very flowery language, but you do that when you like to write stuff, you play it out verbally, right? but really it was true. I could be someone else for hours or for multiple days over the course of the weekend, and I wouldn't have to live in the world that I lived in that was real.
That strikes me as one thing that hadn't occurred to me, but I'm sure this has happened to folks other than you. When you describe your background, if we're sitting here and we had started this conversation with, "Hi, I'm Mike, I'm an addict." "Hi, Mike." And you gave your background, a lot of people will go, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's totally how people end up on meth.
Yeah.
But instead of developing an addiction to serious drugs and creating and having that life, you got into gaming, and instead the peer pressure had you watching Monty Python.
Well, I'll be honest with you. Certainly, excuse me. Certainly, I have an addictive personality. And as an adult, as substances became certainly more readily available and more potent, I have to concede that I've had my struggles there for sure. But role-playing games and gaming in general have always been my drug of choice.
And that escapism is one of the aspects that, as you said, it let you go be somebody else at a time that being you wasn't very much fun.
Right.
But
well, and the worst part is, and again, I'm not looking for sympathy. I mean, I'm a relatively healthy, middle-aged, not too overweight cis cracker, right? Like I don't need your fucking sympathy. I ride a surfboard through life every day. So it's not what I'm looking for. But but what you just said is still true. And when I was doing it, dude, it wasn't cool. Like you would get picked on, or you would get beat up, or if you were me, you would get in trouble for hitting people for making fun of what you do, so that escape in and of itself still carried a stigma at the time, right? So you grow up abused, depressed, mentally ill, and abused by your peers because of the one thing that gives you solace from your home life. So, but again, anyway, I shouldn't make it sound too ugly, because again, I am absolutely blessed. I really am.
And gaming was an integral part of that. And I think there's a couple of different things we could approach here. One of them being part of gaming and gamer culture, and for all of its challenges and all of the ways the gaming culture is ugly, because every culture has its ugly parts. Doesn't matter which culture you choose. It could be for sports fandom, martial arts, writing, whatever. But being a part of that culture, having an interest came with a group of friends, a group of peers, can be helpful. And then there's also just the playing games as a family, which I know wasn't part of your background, but I know that you make a habit of and a point of introducing your nephews to games, introducing your friends' kids to games, and gaming with kids. One of the things that I've noticed, at least with my youngest, had some anger management issues. And one of the things was he was 10 years younger than his older brother. He was smart. And so there was a lot of, in his early life, hey, you're much younger and much less durable than everybody. You just kind of get to have what you want because it's easier, right? And then it got into school. There's a bit of a problem that he hadn't become resourceful with dealing with disappointment and frustration, because a lot of smart people, they don't have to actually deal with that very often. But making the change to kick his butt at board games so that he could, in that moment, experience, well, that sucked, and looking you across the table in the eye, shaking your hand, saying good game, and trying again, was just one of the ways that board games, not even tabletop role-playing games, but board games was a parenting tool for me. And so when you're talking, Mike ran a game store for a very long time, and then even like a chain of game stores. And you would be introducing games to parents or introducing games to your nephews and telling their parents about it. What are some of the things that that you've noticed, or some themes about that, where games aren't just fun, but they're good for kids?
So the stigma at the time that I would have to deal with early on in my role-playing game store career would be the echoes of the Satanic Panic, and that are, it's the turn of the century, it's the early 2000s, 2000 whatever, right? Very early on, and people would come in still with concerns that in the Midwest, is this something that's going to be bad for my kids? Is it going to turn them toward darkness? And so my argument would always be, well, do you let your kids play Grand Theft Auto? Right. And so you can disassociate that beating a hooker to increase the health of your character is not a real thing and is not actually damaging your child. Okay, well, how about a game where they read and they do math and they use their imagination and they exercise critical thinking and they socialize and they hang out with one another, not in front of a screen. I mean, already out of the gate, that game fucking wins. It's just, that's where I want to spend my time. But more importantly, if you do a cost benefit analysis, my return on investment for a role-playing game is just significantly higher. Even if you're looking at 3.5 D&D, I'm sorry to get all businessy guy about it, but if you're looking at, I'm sorry, 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, it's $150 for all 3 of those books, but you can play that damn game until the cows come home. And the lessons that your child is going to learn, and the confidence, the ability to speak, the ability to manage a group of people, to control a room, those things are all absolutely wonderful. And beating up hookers for health is never going to do that.
Yeah. Just real quick, listeners, if you're not familiar with the term Satanic Panic, if you're my age or older, you probably remember that during the 80s into the early 90s, there was a theme in the religious right, among religious people, that Dungeons and Dragons was satanic, that fantasy in general, whether that be Narnia, Lord of the Rings, what have you, was somehow anti-Christian and satanic, and the slang term that is in the gaming industry for that theme is the Satanic Panic.
Yeah, in fact, the industry has its own villain who had a very successful Kickstarter, who wrote a brilliant role-playing game called the Satanic Panic, all about how everything about Dungeons and Dragons from the early 80s is real. It is devil worship. It's run by demons, and you're all special agents of a secret government organization who go and kill tabletoppers. It's brilliant.
I still remember
Dude, I tried to buy it.
Yeah.
I literally reached out to him on multiple occasions. I was this close to getting my hands on the property, and he started doing Kickstarter updates again. It was delightful. We were so close to having the game in the hands of the Influence Foundation so I could actually publish it, because it's so brilliant.
That's fantastic. But I remember the Jack Chick tract about Dungeons and Dragons that ended with burning all those things. And what I loved particularly about that was they had a pile of books they were burning, and they name checked a bunch of authors. Tolkien was in there, and he included C.S. Lewis, arguably the most important Christian writer of the early 20th century, in the pile. But we digress. You can see that I might not have processed out all of my anger over that. But you raise a very good point.
It seems that the zealots always eat their own, right?
Yeah. But you make a really good point with tabletop role-play games in particular, where the skills that you're called upon to use at the table in those games include everything from basic to intermediate math, to problem solving, to public speaking, to even self-regulation if something doesn't go your way in the game. And these are all things that we can use, whether it's tabletop role-playing game or board games, to teach our kids skills that they will need, not just to succeed in school and in life and in business, but also to stay safe. That assertiveness, that creativity, that approach to problem solving, that's not something we're born with. I'll digress a little bit. There's a guy we had on the show, I think 2 seasons ago, Gary Quisenberry, who he's got 4 books? There's a trilogy, quadrology,
Sure. Well,
Here,
Matt, you're the actual professional author, so I'm going to defer to you, sir.
I'm gonna make we're gonna say it's a quadrology, and we'll be that's what it's gonna be. But it's called the Heads Up series. This guy was a federal air marshal for a lot of years, worked in federal prisons for a while. He kind of knows a little bit about paying attention, so you're alive at the end of the day. And he has a series of 4 books about, the first one's on situational awareness for general public. Second one's for parents of small children. Third one's for teens, general public. And then the one that hasn't been released yet is about why you travel. But one of the things that he points out in the book for kids and the book for teens is playing games that teach situational awareness. Playing, he calls them what if games, where you're with your kid at the fair. And so if you got separated from me, what would you do? And then they tell you, and you talk about it, and you workshop the problem they have. And
Well,
that's a role-playing
games. Yeah, exactly, right? Role-playing games do precisely that. They and again, I certainly cannot, I don't have any military or martial arts experience whatsoever. So I cannot conflate the two, but role-playing games are certainly an exercise for your mind. And I know that when you learn something, when it becomes rote, when you're doing a kata or you're doing forms and you're teaching your body something to become muscle memory, whether you're doing drills with your pistol or whether you're whatever thing that you do, dancing, what have you. With role-playing games, you're exercising your mind constantly through a variety of situations. And so I cannot help but believe that certainly imprints on your mind. My wife was near killed back in 2005, and my brother only sort of jokingly said that, he believes that Dungeons and Dragons saved her life because she was parked in front of her house. It was just after midnight, and the villain of the piece turned the wrong way on a one-way street, and he parks his car basically nose to tail with my wife's. His window is down. It's August, but it's late in the evening, so her window is down. Her window was up, but she recognizes him and immediately ducks and dives her head underneath the glove compartment on the passenger side. So when she's hit, even though she's shot 6 times, only 5 of the bullets actually penetrate her, and everything hits her in the lower body from the ass down. Now, we can get into the hows and the whys and the what have yous, but she kept her cool. So here she is alone in the middle of the night in her car, trapped by herself, unarmed, being shot 6 times point blank, and had the wherewithal to, well, in that situation, how do I live? Because I don't want to freeze, right? She didn't freeze. And she did what I don't think most people would do. She ducked. And then when I woke up, ran outside of the car because I was woken by the gunfire, run outside. The first thing she did is say, I've been shot. This is who shot me. This is the direction he went.
That is coolness under fire that police and military don't always show.
Yeah,
and I think you're exactly
a beast, man.
Right. Clearly.
Yeah,
and I think you're exactly right. Where if you talk to elite athletes, one of the things they do is they visualize. They sit and they visualize very deeply taking the perfect shot, dealing with the situation, especially if they're getting over a problem or that there's a specific issue they want to fix. They'll visualize doing it correctly and then do it physically. And that visualization gets them out of that lizard brain, reptile brain, freezing and bad habits. And it sounds like the problem solving that your wife did, that visualization of, they're imaginary life and death situations, but there's a part of your brain that doesn't really know that.
Right.
And so she was faced with this real life danger, immediately reverted to the problem solving mode that we spend a gaming session in.
No, it's absolutely true. Absolutely true.
Now, that's amazing. I wasn't expecting a story like that, but that's a great story of how it can literally save your life in real time.
Yeah, my brother, we're in the hospital, right? It's maybe 48 hours later, so we know that she's gonna live. And at this point, the guy who shot, we didn't know this for months, but the guy who shot her killed himself. So once he heard on the news that she had lived and that she had identified him, and they, his name's out there, blah blah blah, blew his brains out. So a positive ending to the story in terms of she never had to see him again and she never had to testify. But my brother would joke, there's an old X-Files episode where this very insultingly stereotypical guy, doughy, balding, glasses, fat, everything that you would think about a gamer in the 80s or 90s. It's an X-Files episode where this guy looks at Sculptor Ramoli and goes, you don't play Dungeons and Dragons for as long as I have and not learn a thing or two about courage.
Yeah. And that's,
it's
a throwaway line, but it's true.
Yeah. Yeah. My brother was convinced that, that Dungeons and Dragons saved her life. And I was like, well, God, I hope that's true, because this is the hobby that I love more than anything in the world.
Yeah. And I think most gamers, even though it's not an extreme, if you put them to it, can probably think of a time that something like that happened. Now, and tabletop role-playing game is its own experience. And it's something that I enjoy. Mike and I know each other because of our mutual membership in a role-playing game podcast fan group, because that's how nerdy we are. But there's also, for parents who aren't quite ready for that commitment, there's also board games. I would like to point out that the people that I'm not very smart, and I undersell my intelligence to let people's guard down. And I very deliberately and calculated, because I'm a sociopath, and even though I don't have empathy, I wield it like a tool. I worked my way, sir, from a fan to the inner sanctum of the addendum. I, sir, am a regular host on that show. That is a very fair point, sir. So you're even nerdier than me.
No, dude, I love it. So yeah, I've been doing Fear the Boot now for about 9 years.
Yeah.
And I reached out to Dan and I was like, I love this show. Can I come on and talk about being a retailer? And they had me on. And here I am years later. Now I'm merely color commentary, because intellectually I can't hold a candle to those guys.
Yeah, you do my shtick, which we pretend to be a little dumb because it lets us say funny things.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and I don't know what it is, and I'm not trying to I don't generally brag myself up, but I can say shit in a group of people that other people can't say. Right? I can just get away and just get away with it. Right? There's just a delivery and an obvious absence of malice that you just say gnarly shit and people are like, oh, he's just being gross.
He's just being that guy.
Maybe it's the tick chin. I don't know. It could be that.
Spoon.
Yeah. but I will say, oh, I'm sorry, please.
No, carry on.
I was going to say another significant portion of my skill set that I attribute significantly to gaming is not just my ability to speak to a group of people, but actually to manage a group of people. So in addition to being a retailer for a long time, I ran a chain of stores. We had 4 locations in the St. Louis area. I did that I was with the company for, well over 13 years, but I managed the entire company for over 5. And each store had an independent manager, and I managed those stores. And then on the road in their RV were the owners of the company. And we would meet regularly via the internet, like you and I are speaking now, and touch base about the business. But corporate day-to-day operations and managing the managers was my gig. And had it not been for role-playing games, I would have not had the aptitude for stepping into that job. And the reason I say that is manyfold. But to give some context, I was in an organization, I still am, but now I am as a member of the media, an organization called the Game Manufacturers Association, or GAMA. And GAMA is a group of publishers and retailers and distributors and designers, and basically everything professionally in the industry is represented there. And I had the very, very great privilege of being nominated and elected to one of the two board of directors. There's a main board, which is generally publishers, manufacturer, blah, blah, blah. And then there's what they called the little board at the time, which was all retailers. And I got to be on the little board, and I got to do presentations for other retailers from around the country. And the presentation that I did was about management and gaming, and about how everyone here who's been exposed to role-playing games should certainly have a better understanding of what it means to be a manager. Because here I have a group of people who have different personalities, different motivations, different reasons for why they have fun, different reasons for why they've come to be part of this social group. And I have an objective as the person running the game, and my intention is to get everyone toward a goal. Now, in this scenario, the goal is to tell a collective narrative and have fun inside the confines of some agreed upon rules, right? Well, being a manager is no different. I have a bunch of people that don't want to fucking be here, who have to be here, who have different personalities, who have different things that motivate them, that I have to get to learn each of one of their pressure points so that I can manipulate them. Because as my friend Morgan Weeks says, I hope I can call Morgan my friend, and I'm paraphrasing here, but game mastering is waging psychological warfare against your players. And that's what management is as well, is that you're looking for the areas where you can pressure people. And I know I sound extremely manipulative right now, but it's the truth. People are motivated in different fashions. And to be a good manager, you need to learn what motivates them, what their pressure points are, so you can apply use of those pressure points to motivate them in the directions that you want to go. Role-playing games are the exact same thing. And what's amazing about a role-playing game is that every person who sits down at the table, who plays a character, regardless of how much experience that they have as a role player, whether they run games or have been playing games for many years, there's always a part of them in that thing, right? There's always a bit of personal identity in the thing that they're going to even subconsciously take with them. So you learn the person, and you play the person, not the character, in certain situations, and you can be a lot more successful.
Unless we get too judgy about the manipulation, my sensei, Lee Sprague, one point we were having a conversation, I said something about somebody else being manipulative, and he just kind of looked at me and said, I've been training in karate for half a decade. How many days do you think I wasn't being a little manipulative of you? Right? A good coach and a good teacher also are manipulative. They're manipulative in the best interest of the person they're teaching, but they are, and there are certainly people who are manipulative for bad reasons. And if you want to see the long tail worst case scenario of that, I'll refer you to some of our episodes about child trafficking and child molestation.
That's my red line, man. I can't do that. I listen to there's a comedian named Dan Cummins who does a great podcast called Time Suck. And if there's one thing I have listened, I mean, if you want to make a serial killer, you fuck kids. And don't fuck kids. It's the worst possible outcome for the human race.
Yeah. I'm hoping that anybody who's watching this show doesn't need that advice, but if you do, you heard it from Mike, don't do that.
Well, if you have a predilection for fucking kids, you should kill yourself. Now, and I say that as someone who firmly understands that the recidivism rate of sexual offenders, particularly people who violate children, is so high that your suicide does not haunt me.
Yeah. Heard it here first. And I think a lot of people, the kind of folks who are going to watch a show like this, agree with you
Yeah.
because most of them are parents of children.
Right.
Now, we've been talking about tabletop role-playing games, but there's also board games. And one of the things I've loved as a parent and a nerd particularly is this trend towards cooperative board gaming that's been kind of growing since about 2005 or so. And for me, especially because, as I mentioned earlier, my kids are 10 years apart, you're not going to sit those two at a sorry game or a chess game and have either of them have any fun. Meanwhile, you put them at a game of Forbidden Island or a game of Pandemic, and they're cooperating against the rules of the game, and it's really fun for everybody.
No, so I early on in my gaming career, I poo-pooed cooperative games because I didn't think that was gaming. I was like, no, games are about competition. They're about pitting intellect and imagination and planning and forethought against one another for victory. Now, I talk real pretty, but I don't win games. I'm a reactive individual, not a proactive individual. I'm not a good planner. So like I suck at games like chess and things of that nature. And so I learned to adore cooperative games because I could participate, be useful, and win. And so I like that a lot. The challenge with those type of games is that they end up with what people in the hobby call quarterback syndrome.
Yeah.
You know, where there is an optimal choice every turn, and often a dominant personality will want to take over and manage everyone's turn for them and basically QB the game. So to avoid that, you got to be careful with whom you play those types of games. But I agree with you. They're spectacular. My wife is the opposite of me. She's an introvert. She doesn't really like big war competitive games like some of my buddies and I do. And she loves co-op games. And so we'll play a lot of those style games in the house, but they're great for learning other people too. Watching how someone cooperates, I think is much, much more useful to me than seeing how they compete.
And again, as a parenting tool, watching your kids, seeing what frustrates them. Are they willing to share their resources for the better of the game yet, or is that something they're still learning? How much are they paying attention when it's not their turn? These are all things that we learn about our kids, and again, we can model the behaviors we want. One of the things that I've found as a parent very cool about both the Forbidden series and the Pandemic is that objectively the most powerful character you can have in that game is the one that moves other people around, that gives other people your awesome stuff. You don't do much, but you enable other people to do really cool things. And that is the most powerful and interesting character that you can be, which is something I want my kid to kind of just pick up.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah. In fact, I think that, you know, Wayne from Fear the Boot would be very proud because you've described the Bard. The Bard, oh, I'm sorry, my co-producer is kicked off. I'm sure you can hear that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's my dog, miserable little. Well, I won't say that word on your show. But any which way, what were you saying?
Oh, we're just talking about co-op games and what a powerful tool they are.
No, I adore them. I will say this, in I don't say this lightly. One of my top 3 games of all time, board game wise, is a cooperative game that I'm looking at called Atlantis Rising. Not only is the production value delightful, the mechanics are excellent, and essentially the island of Atlantis and its 6 mystical spokes are all sinking, right? And so much like Pandemic, you have a deck of cards that are showing you what portions of the island are flooding every turn, but it's resource management and worker placement. So what you'll do, you'll place your workers on different spokes. The farther you go out, the easier it is to harvest a specific resource, but the more likely you are to get flooded, right?
Okay, yeah.
Once all workers are placed, then you reveal what sections flood. So you might lose your workers because the section of island that they're on that you're trying to get resources from actually floods, right?
Okay, so you're learning about risk versus reward.
Right, and you get those resources back, so you get to spend them next turn, but you're building a Fargate, which has nothing to do with that movie that I've never seen, but still a pretty good movie. So you're building the Fargate, and you have to leave Atlantis. It's delightful. So you're placing workers, getting resources, building this weird ancient technology, so you can escape Atlantis with as many of its citizens as you can save, you know, thematically, and go off into the next universe. It's kick-ass. Because it is so complicated and there's so much going on, quarterback syndrome, super challenging because everyone's allocating simultaneously.
Yeah, and that is we've talked about it again. The quarterback syndrome, like Mike said, is with a cooperative board game. If you've got an older brother or an experienced gamer who's here and they play their turn, and then the next person to play is younger or less experienced or not as good as games, or maybe just doesn't know the rules of that game, it's very tempting for that older brother to say, no, don't do that, do this instead. So really it's this one person playing solitaire with other people around the table. And there's different ways to get around that. There was a zombie game that actually had it in the rules where if you gave instructions to somebody else at the table, it increased the chances of more zombies showing up. Which I thought was elegant.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I forget often that I am not talking to gamers. I'm so surrounded by and used to people who just speak the language that I didn't even think that there's somebody listening going, what the hell's quarterback syndrome? What does that mean?
Well, jargon in general, right? That's just kind of about the show in general. I've found that a lot of my role in this show is translating between operator and parent, or professional psychologist and parent, and gamer and parent.
Right.
Now, one of the things I think that's really important about gaming with our kids, first of all, encourage our kids to game, because the wealth of things they can get from that is, I don't think it can be overestimated. But also to game with our kids, because kids listen to us a little, but they watch us a lot. And if they can see us planning our turns in a way that works, if they can see us dealing with frustration with grace and losing with poise, and looking across the table and saying, if it's a competitive game, hey, good game, well done, I really like that thing you did, thanks, we'll play again. Or if we lose in a cooperative game, going, well, rats, I really hoped we'd won that, but we had fun, right? If they can see us in those moments they are elevated emotionally in comparison to their actual objective importance. And if they can see us behaving in that way in those moments, they will remember that. And kids do what we do. They don't do what we say.
It's a frightening thought.
I know, right?
Yeah, no, it sounds terrible, but there are some people in this world that are not built for having children. I'm certainly one of those people. And my wife is one of those people, man. Like we met in high school, and the day I met her, I knew, I was like, I'm going to marry her someday. And, here we are almost 30 years later, but I knew very early on that she's always been very mature, very wise, the cliche and old soul, but she knew as a teenager, she's like, I don't want to have kids. And if you want to be with me, you just need to accept that. Right. And so we don't, but I certainly recognize that, and I don't say this glibly, there is a tremendous amount of maturity that comes with having children that I have missed. And I certainly, and I know he's, persona non grata, but, as Jordan Peterson would describe, I have Peter Pan syndrome, right? I mean, I am a middle-aged, childless man-child. I mean, my wife she does very well for herself. She works from home. I'm basically a house husband. And, like I said, I'm super, super blessed. But
No, you're not a house husband, Mike. You're a trophy husband.
Thank you. I've lost a lot of weight. I've lost quite a bit of weight. In the since the pandemic started. Drunk, hunk, or chunk is what people did, and I'm trying to be less chunk, I guess, is sort of the area where I fall. But any which way, yeah.
Anywho, yeah. So to wrap up, just real quick, because you are deeply immersed in the industry. And, I think we've established why parents should play more games with their kids. Also, Chutes and Ladders sucks, guys. It just does. So get over yourselves. Just Chutes and Ladders sucks. Uncle Wiggly, sorry. These are not good games. But there are great games out there. So if I've got a kid in, say, the preschool to early elementary age, what are some of the games?
The hardest goddamn question in the industry. Because
it is.
Here's what happens. Is people come into the FLGS, to the friendly local game store, and they're like, I have a 10-year-old and I'm looking for a gamer. I have a 6-year-old and I'm looking for a game. And I'm like, dude, first of all, I'm a middle-aged man-child who works at a gaming store. I mean, should I be giving you advice about any fucking thing in the world, right? But it's hard because the industry doesn't really focus a lot on children because, and I don't mean to sound mercenary, children aren't where the money is, right? There's not a lot of the disposable income in the 4 to 10-year-old range, right? However, there are definitely companies now like Haba, which is, I think it's H-A-B-A. I think it's just the 4 letters. Haba is a game that specifically makes games toward children. Now, the way they distribute their games is a little bit different. So a lot of game stores don't carry them, but I'm sure you can find them online. Your local game store might be a place that carries Haba products. It's certainly a place that I would start if I'm looking for board games for children. The other area that I would look, some great companies out there make versions of their very popular board games directly targeted toward children. So they will make a truncated version of the game that is less complicated for a more remedial audience. There's a lot of companies out there that do that as well.
Like Catan, Settlers Catan has a kids version, for example.
So Castle Panic, which is a co-op game, which is one of my personal favorites, has a kids version. Jamie Stegmaier's Scythe, which is an absolutely brilliant board game, has a kids version. I think it's called My First Scythe. Role-playing game-wise, there's a brilliant game called No Thank You Evil. And it is a role-playing game specifically designed for kids. Now, I am, as in politics, they call you a policy wonk. I'm an RPG wonk. So I have a copy of No Thank You Evil that I'm looking over. Actually, I want to run at the next Fear the Con Evil, yes, please. And I want to use the No Thank You Evil mechanics to run an adult game, right, where we're all supervillains, or where the PCs are all supervillains. Anyway, those are good. Those are great choices. Wizards of the Coast for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, the 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons starter box, and then I think the second introductory box, there's a second one, but their introductory starter box is so worth the $20. It's absolutely amazing. So if people are interested in doing a role-playing game, there is not, in my opinion, a better product on the market to start your kids with than that box set if they want to do a role-playing game. If they're younger and they want to do a role-playing game, No Thank You Evil. And then, like I said, Haba board games are a great place to start. But you already named Pandemic, which is one I'm looking at on my shelf. Pandemic is an excellent choice for a good introductory game. Ticket to Ride, Code Names. I mean, I would if they're serious about it, I would go to boardgamegeek.com and don't be
Mhm.
shy about asking questions on the forums,
Mhm.
because you're not going to find a better community for people that are going to help you out with that kind of thing.
That is one thing about the gaming community that I appreciate now, and I feel like it's changed a little bit over the decades since we first got in, but it is one of the more welcoming communities, full of a lot of people who just really like to nerd out about the hobby. So if you ask them questions, they'll answer.
No, for sure. People, gamers want to make other gamers. In fact, there was, well, you know what, your show's not about that, so I'm not going to get into it. But there was a moment where the word gamer was considered a bad word and an exclusionary thing, and I just think that's bullshit, right? I have never been part of a community that is more open about accepting people. Now, there's a lot of diversity in life, or a lot of challenges in life and discrimination that I haven't faced. But the hobby's getting a lot more diverse. It really is. And I think particularly like in the trans community, you'll see a lot more trans people than you will people of color. I just think gamers are open to people being different.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And as parents, if you are a parent of somebody who is in what's the term we use now, a marginalized population or a population that faces discrimination, gaming can actually be a haven for that. Because one of the other things that happens in gaming is you find a cohort that you game with, and these are often people who are still your friends 30 years later. And it's a group of people that you spend time with and have adventures with and solve problems with and support you and become legitimate, real friends, which is sometimes a hard thing to do, especially if you're the only trans kid in your middle school.
I have just an anecdote, if I may. I don't want to run your show too long, but I game with a friend named Brent. And Brent and I met when I was working as a basic retail clerk in the early 2000s at a comic and game store called the Fantasy Shop, right? That I eventually went to run one day. And Brent came in, and Brent was an obnoxious, smarter than thou, obese 13-year-old. So he was so uncomfortable with his own and in his own skin, and he was smarter than everyone else around him, and he wielded his intellect like a scalpel, right? And he wasn't a nice kid, right? He was a dick, and I was brutal to this kid. I mean, I was, here I am. I'm young, I'm hip, I'm tattooed, I smoke cigarettes, I work at the game store, right? Like kids want to hang out and hang out at the game store and be with the game guys, right? Like there's a certain amount of minor celebrity in it. And which if you're not in gaming culture, you don't get it. But whatever, I don't expect you to get it because it's not a real thing. Anyway, I just brutal with the kid. I just wouldn't put up with this bullshit, right? I'm like, you think you have verbal superiors? You're not the only sociopath in this room, man. I'll fucking crush you. So any which way, here we are years later. He's ripped. He makes well into the six figures. He is my nemesis. He spent a great amount of time in the military. He now works for an IT company, managing a huge group of IT people and putting out fires all over the country. We still game together to this day, right? Because of the hobby, we imprinted on each other. But we also kind of matured together. We grew up together. And now not only do we game together, we go to each other's friends' weddings and their kids' birthday parties. And, we developed this thing around being rejects, both of us, and, trying to grow up in this other culture of rejects, and to see what's happened with the gaming hobby, being guys that grew up, getting our books knocked out of our hands and, being called the F word and, getting picked on and shoved in, or whatever bullshit, right? So now I see trans kids with pink cattails and robotic cat ears, playing Settlers of Catan with people that look like my grandpa, right? I mean, it's wonderful to see how the hobby has changed and is still very accepting of people. But you're absolutely right. The relationships that I have built around gaming, frankly, are the only relationships that I pay any attention to.
Yeah. And so if you're just tuning in now, folks, games are good for our kids. We should encourage it. Yeah. No, please.
Oh, no. If we're signing out, I just wanted to make sure I had an opportunity to plug my show. But no, games are good for our kids. No, do your thing, please.
Yeah. Games are good for your kids. Playing games with our kids is good. Encouraging our kids to play games when we're not there is also good. And Mike made some very good suggestions for gateway games for our kids, and we'll put some in the show notes. And also we want to plug Mike's show. So your goinfo.com is your website, and your show is Why We Game.
That is correct. Yeah. So I would encourage people to check out the episode with Jim Pinto. I would say that that's probably my best work so far. So not the episode I dropped this week, but the episode I dropped the week before. Not that any of them are bad. I mean, Jason Brick has been on the show, and I would certainly encourage you to check out the Jason Brick episode. But if I linked anything, I would say here, the Jim Pinto is the show and what you get and what I want the show to be. So. And then I would also, if you're interested in role-playing games and you want to listen to a show about role-playing game advice and a little bit more, I would encourage you to check out Fear the Boot. They have been doing a podcast since 2006. They're one of the oldest podcasts in the role-playing game arena, and tons of advice. Just if you don't want crassness and vulgarity, don't listen to the episodes I'm on.
Yeah. And they even have a series of step 0 introduction to role-playing games that they did, I want to say around the 2014, 2015 range. That's a good place to start as well.
Yeah, there's a big thing in the role-playing game industry called Session Zero, and Fear the Boot never gets credited for it, but Fear the Boot are the people that coined the phrase Session Zero. That is a Fear the Boot invention, and they never get credit for it.
And they should. And it is a very good show, especially if you're curious about games and want to, because there is some resistance in some parts of the world to role-playing games in particular. Not board games so much, but role-playing games. But if you're curious and interested, give that show in particular a couple of listens, because they'll set you straight. All right. Well, Mike, thank you so much for coming on the show. Before we go, is there anything else that you feel the need to hold forth on?
All I can say is that if you like a clean shave, my buddy Chris Parsons just launched a website. Well, here, I'll go into my pitch. I used to hate to shave. It used to be a burden, tedious, but now shaving is a ritual. I elevated my game with wizardsupply.store. Now I shave with a safety razor, and every stroke is a true strike.
But wizards don't shave.
What's that?
But wizards don't shave. Have you seen Gandalf?
Right. Well, you know what? But some of you are born with rancid Eurotrash French blood, and you can't grow facial hair. And so the only thing that you can do to feel manly is actually put an extremely sharp piece of metal to your throat and peel what little bit of hair you have away.
Fair enough.
If you go to wizardsupply.store, all caps, and use the promo code WhyWeGame, you'll get 20% off your first order.
Outstanding. Great. Well, Mike, thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing your experience.
Thank you.
All right, man. Well, take care, everybody. Stay safe. We'll see you all next time.